like how you did your hair and makeup and how it looks so good. That's
I
what I
mean,
want
which
to
ring light to buy? I am here to help. I
know.
think we're probably ready to get started. We've got still a couple people trickling in, but
And if
in
they
the
come in, we
interest
can
of
figure it
time,
out. Yeah, no problem.
all right. So good morning, everybody. We are so glad that you're here. It feels like Monday, but I think it's actually Wednesday. I thought it was Wednesday all day yesterday, but we're so glad that you're here, and hopefully you knew it was Wednesday. So it is just after 11. I'm Nicole Boynton with TNT, and we are so excited to welcome Leigh Budlong from, am I saying that right, Leigh?
You are.
Okay, from
Yep, anytime.
Zonabiilty, and she's going to tell us all kinds of super smart stuff about CodeNext. So if you have questions, we're going to ask that you drop those in chat, or at the end, you're free to unmute yourselves and ask questions, but we'll kind of keep a running tally of any questions so that Leigh can answer those. The presentation itself will run about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over and let Leigh take the reins.
Okay, everybody. I am really excited to do this. This was actually a very difficult one to prepare for. I'll be honest and tell you, it was, it's challenging. CodeNext is this moving target, and I'm just sharing my screen. So give me a second here. I'm going to pull up my presentation nice and large, and hopefully it's all going to be very clear. If anyone can't see it, I'm going to watch Nicole's face. I think everything looks like everyone's able to see it, which is great. All right. I came up with the idea of saying passion because I think this is a very passionate subject. And I've really tried to take a look at this thing from a couple of different angles. My background is real estate, just so you know. I'm not a real estate law person. I didn't go to law school. I love real estate. I just do. And I wanted something like Zonabiilty when I was practicing. And the idea of Zonabiilty is to bring information to your fingertips, into your hands, so you can start to understand property potential. And that is really, at the end of the day, what zoning is all about. Once it's in place, you get to use it to understand what you can do with a property. And so with CodeNext, the difficult part is that it's not done yet. So we're going to go through what the status is. We're going to cover that. I'm going to give you some practical tips. And I'm going to go over a couple of theoretical points. And the reason I thought it was important to bring those in was because you're going to hear these things. You're going to get questions. And I thought it's better to expose you to some of the basic concepts that are behind the scenes that I think will help you understand how to really think about things when you're reading different articles, when you're maybe participating with groups in your neighborhood about these kinds of issues. I just thought it was an important thing to cover. So without that, let me get going. There are really two philosophies when it comes to zoning, and that's preservation versus change. So preserve versus change. And then things get built off of these two concepts. There can be a mix for sure, but one usually takes precedent. Anyone who's been in Austin long enough knows about, again, when RDS came into play and they wanted to keep houses from being McMansions, and preservation became a big deal. I think what's fair to say is that as a residential agent, the reason you want to know about CodeNext is because I think things are shifting onto the other side of change. And this is really a function that's happening across the country. It's not just Austin necessarily. You just happen to be in a very sweet spot for all kinds of people wanting to move and businesses wanting to move all into your locale. So that's really the deal. This is a law person, this Doug Dillard, and he is saying that 75% of residential land, that's typically the rule of thumb, let's say for cities in the past, it's now going to go and reverse towards more multifamily. So that's why, that by the way, is why I really think you need to think about this. You're in residential real estate. Where are you positioned? How are you positioned? What's happening? How does this impact your business? And really the products that your clients like, their homes they like. This is going to have you rethink, I think, a lot about how you're looking at your business if it goes through. So let's go talk about the timeline. Imagine Austin, there was a vote in 2012. There was a draft issued in 2016 with CodeNext. 2018, there was a question, should we put it up to the vote and just let the population, let the voters decide if this works or not. They decided not to do that. Then in 2019, draft 2 was positioned, and it's hard to believe this, folks, but just in February, it feels like a year ago, there was a vote, a 7-4 vote, saying this is going to go forward. They had to do what they call readings. So legally, okay, zoning there's a political aspect to it. There's a legal process to it. There is a vote, obviously. These city council people are voting to say yes or no to CodeNext, and they have to do these readings and do public, again, if anyone was involved in this in December, the hearing went on, I think that they did 2 8-hour sessions back to back on a weekend or something crazy. I did listen in on some of them, and again, some of the comments were really interesting. I've written about those, but again, it's a public process. COVID-19 hit and things just really stopped in its tracks for obvious reasons. But the other thing that happened is that it became and again, this is because zoning is legal, there is a process, and you can bring things to court, which is exactly what has happened with CodeNext. CodeNext, again, there was a judge who has decided they need to, again, if you look at my slide, I'll just read it. On March 18th, the Travis County District Judge ruled that the city did not follow the correct notice and protest process for the LDC revision. And so what does that mean, right? It's putting the rewrite in jeopardy, according to Austin Monitor. Obviously, it puts things on hold. And the reason why this is an issue is because there is such a thing as property rights, all right? And so rezoning and having proper notice is part of what happens when you own property. That's just the way it goes. You do have property rights. And what is a rezoning protest is really an ability for a homeowner, a property owner, to say, hey, I don't agree with this. I don't want to have this happen to my property. And so again, this is part of the bundle of rights that you purchase when you buy a property. And property owners are allowed to go ahead, and this is through the Texas statute. This is a 1927 rule, okay? This is not like they just did this last month. This allows the citizen, a person owning property, if you will, to say, hey, I don't want this done to my property, and you cannot, I'm going to read this, when you file a rezoning protest in connection with your property, the jurisdiction, in this case, the city of Austin, can't rezone your property without approval by the city council by a 3/4 vote. So you can imagine this is going to be the problem. If you are rezoning 10,000 properties, let's say, and 6,000 people have protested, how are you going to go through all the 3/4 votes for each of those? It's just not, it's not going to be possible, is what they're saying. And that's why the city has decided to appeal the court decision. And furthermore, not only can you as a property owner decide to go forward and say, I want my property protected, but neighbors can band together as well. So again, it gives the requirement, it puts the burden on the government, is really what it comes down to. If they're going to rezone you, they're going to have to do it with 3/4 vote. It can't be a simple majority. You can still file for a protest for property. Your property clients of yours may want to know about this. Again, what will happen? Anyone doesn't, I mean, at this point, who knows? If it goes to the appeal and it gets upheld, then the city of Austin is going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what it needs to do in order to get its objectives met. If you filed for a rezoning protest, does your property get that 3/4 vote requirement? Possibly. I mean, again, I think that that's really, I would think that that's what the case will happen. Again, I'm not the attorney here, but it seems to me that if you own a property and you go through that process of submitting that you don't want to have your property rezoned without city council having to vote on it, 3/4 a vote, then you might want to consider this. And again, I just put a URL down here. This site right now, Community Not Commodity, has a lot of information for people who want to protest their taxes, and includes the form that you can submit. So speculative. It's speculative right now as to what the outcome will be. Again, City of Austin's appealing. Maybe there'll be a partial rezoning, right? Maybe there'll be something that they do sort of like a Rainy Street concept, right? That Rainy Street was not zoned for what is there now. It went through a whole rezoning process, but they picked one area. And a lot of times they'll do that with zoning. Again, if you work in neighborhoods and let's say Burnett Road, there's what they call a specific plan for that location. So they'll take a whole area and they'll say, we want to really rethink what we want to see here. And they'll start putting in, not necessarily always hardcore requirements, but a lot of guidelines, a lot of things that people will want to be incentivized if they build there. So again, they create a new landscape, if you will, for a location without necessarily going through a full rezoning. Again, the CodeNext is a rezoning of really the majority of the city. Some parcels have been earmarked, if you will, to stay with what they call the old code, or F25. But again, you might end up with a hybrid, which is kind of funny. We have seen this in Dallas, for example. They have areas where the old zoning stayed. So now you have two zoning ordinances for your city, essentially. So again, maybe they'll appeal, maybe they'll do a partial rezoning, maybe they'll do something voluntary, maybe they'll bring it to vote. Again, these are all speculative. I don't know necessarily what the outcomes will be. And really the push and pull on land use in general, this to take a step back and just kind of say, look, demographics, property values, quality of life. These are the things that are really driving the passion, fueling the passion, if you will. And in the case of Austin, my goodness, the demographics are there. The property values have gone up, and your quality of life, question mark. That could be a question mark for some, I'm sure. But when I say up, it's because Austin is being marketed as the place. Look at the rankings here from all these different sources. Wall Street Journal down to Wallet Hub, Forbes. I mean, everyone's got you as a 1 or 2 ranking. And so that's putting pressure on people wanting to think about making the move. Now, City Council had some objectives when they got together and said, all right, this is now 2019. How are we going to approach CodeNext? They really focused on housing capacity, missing middle housing, compatibility regulations, and parking. These were actually done through city staff. They said, look, City Council, you have to just tell us, what are these? Are these important? Are they not important? And they said, let's focus on these 4. The reason I put the colors here is because the blue had to do more with actual zoning rules, if you will. Right now in Austin, there's a big thing on compatibility, meaning if you are selling a residential property and next door is commercial, the commercial property can't just use all of its commercial zoning the same way as if that property next door were commercial, right? So when residential's got protection right now, you've got commercial and residential, or residential and commercial. The commercial can go up to the number of stories it's supposed to, but it has to be stepped back. And that just changes the design. It means they need more land in order to not crowd over that residential house and create this wall of commercial over that property. That's a compatibility regulation. Parking is a big issue. This is across the country. Everyone who is thinking about issues of how to change, they'll say, well, let's just get rid of parking. But then the quality of life issue comes up a lot of times for neighborhoods where they say, well, now there's nowhere to park. Everyone's parking on the street. There's nowhere to park. And so, again, that is part of the issue. The more orangey red here is really about more theoretical, technical aspects of zoning that I'm going to cover right now for you. So they come up with goals from a comprehensive plan. We want to build so many new housing units by a certain time period. In 2017, City of Austin said we want to build 135,000 new housing units over the next 10 years. And we want 60 or 44% of them, 60,000 of them, to be affordable to a family making $75,500 a year. Okay. And in 2019, they said, no, and I cite my source here. They said they upped the ante. No, we're not going to do 135,000. We're going to do 405,000. We want to build more housing. And so in essence, by flooding the market with more supply, the idea is that it would create a lower price, right? It's a market demand force concept. Here's some slides to go over. Again, I can send links to this, to Nicole's follow-ups. But again, just so you can understand those bonus capacities, this is all part of how you have to engineer to get to those numbers. I mean, again, you can think anything you want to about how many houses you want to sell next year or whatever else, but you have to figure out how you're going to get there. And that's what this is really representing. They're trying to figure out, we have this much capacity, that's what the green is, this much capacity, this is for the 145,000. I don't know why this is 145 versus 135, but I think it's the same, again, that concept right there. Here's where they wanted to build under the revised code. And then here's what the big goal, right? Where they said, we're going to take the 135, there's the $135,000 or 135,000 unit number. This is where they said, no, we're going to make a big goal here. But this is the breakout. They don't show a breakout by base capacity and bonus capacity necessarily. They're in this one. They're going to try and make this thing happen through base and what they call bonus, and then what they call income restricted. Income restricted is where they say you can live somewhere, you can rent this place, but you can't make more than this much money. That's where you have to prove your income is a certain level. And then market rate housing, obviously that's a huge number that they're building. And I want to go back for a second and correct myself. Basically, these are the same 397 to 405. They just kind of, the numbers don't quite add up, but this was the idea. This is the breakout for this big goal, just to be clear. And again, it's a little bit, it gets a little dicey when you start to look at this, because again, income restricted, by district. So again, Austin is now a 10, again, the way the city council set up, they've got 10 districts. So each district, this is where they are seeing the restricted affordable housing bonus to go. So again, going back to this slide, here's your 9,000 units of what they're trying to say are going to be income restricted. And then they have something like this, which again, doesn't necessarily add up. This is not my slide per se. And so it goes to the city of Austin, but you can see where they're trying to get to their 9,000 units on this. This looks like it actually goes to 9, but in here, affordable housing goal, it's not just the income. That's what it is. See the income restricted right here? This will add up to this little number right here, the 9,000, and right here, and this. That's where you get all those new units. So again, the idea is that they're going to be building a lot of new units, and the important thing also to take into consideration as an aspirational goal with all this is this notion of sustainability. So again, sustainability features and what have you are a big deal. This means that properties that are in locations, these are called infill development locations, those are the targets, the locations of small houses that, maybe they can add on. This is a slide that shows missing middle, and I'm moving this little thing over just so you can see, again, these are like the 2 to 8 units, and taking 2 units and putting, again, a garage between the two and maybe actually putting them on one parcel. That's the idea. It's to add more density, so more dwelling units per parcel. Missing middle housing is 2 to 8 units. It includes duplexes and fourplexes, townhomes, row homes, bungalows, all these kinds of things, not just the huge, large apartment buildings that a lot of times you're seeing with all the cranes in Austin. And I just put this in for just a moment of relief, like, something pretty to look at, something kind of funny to look at, the old little, like the simple life, right? Mowing your own lawn on a Saturday. Single family housing is definitely part of the theory of, is that the problem? Are the single family homes taking up land that should be duplexes or fourplexes or even more? That's really the theory that goes behind a lot of these changes, if you will. And this was a study that was done, it was published in the New York Times, just saying that basically, Austin's only got about 40, looks at 41% single family only zoning. And they use these, for those who know zoning in Austin, it's not the SF3, which is really a popular zoning district. SF3 will allow for a duplex if your lot's over 7,000 square feet, right? So they require a larger lot size in order to get that duplex on. That's a big change with all this CodeNext, is to make the same lot support either a house, a duplex. That's the whole notion. They want to try and make it so that you can build a duplex on the same size land that you could build a house. And I'm just going to quickly go through this again, just to understand the context as to how these things happen, because these don't just come out of nowhere. I mean, again, the policies that get circulated around the country. You have think tanks. You've got, again, what I highlight, this is 50 cities this person has worked in. Austin, Portland, you in Austin get compared to Portland and Minneapolis quite a bit. And again, it's because zoning is supposed to be based on local needs and what have you, but a lot of the guys and people who are influencing policy actually do this across the country, and they actually do bring a lot of the same ideas to the same cities. It probably adds an efficiency, if you will, but the people deciding policy, well, that would be your city council members, your planning commissioners, the administrative review people, and again, the people vote on these comprehensive plans. So once you vote, that's what sets everything in motion. And so this is, again, the transportation part of CodeNext is a big deal for those people who are really close to this subject. That's really the big thing, is how does transportation tie into zoning? And so this person, Anique, is, she's the co-leader of this, and she's calling things, again, this was a source I've cited right here where someone was like, well, we're upzoning all this location, and it's because it's due to a high opportunity area. So I want to make sure you understand some of the theoretical concepts behind it. So what is a high opportunity area? And these are areas that, again, I'll read the definition, an area that provides certain conditions that place individuals in a position to be more likely to succeed and excel, as defined by the City of Austin's strategic blueprint implementation. there are development opportunities for developers to build those bonus sizes. So again, that crazy chart with all the little, where they can get more units built, they can do that in these high opportunity locations. So here's a map showing these. So this blue outline is showing the high opportunity index area. And then this side shows the vulnerable displacement. So again, they've got two philosophies going on. We need to build more housing, and we want to build it in the high opportunity locations, and that's where we're going to offer the incentives. And then we've got other parts of Austin that we have to protect because we don't want to displace them. So they have to figure out how to balance these two things. And that's really what is at stake with CodeNext, is where are they going to get those 400,000 new housing units? As you can see on here, and I know there's a ton of development going on in East Austin, but they're really also looking at that west side. Measuring policy, I'm going to look at the time. Okay, so I'll get through this pretty quickly. This to me is the biggest issue. Personally, again, I'm not a policy person. I didn't go to law school, but to me, I would really love to have an annual report as to how policies were implemented, what were their objectives, and what changes actually got made. I find it very frustrating that you don't get to actually see this. My company works with the actual data on zoning, where the zoning is right now, future land plans, but we don't get to see how these policies were measured, like, again, how the housing units were measured on a regular basis across the country. There's not a data set that does that. So again, you in real estate might find a way to get more involved with say ABOR or what have you. But this is the financial impact. We're going now to practical, which is really much more comfortable and practical than policy, because practical is it makes all the sense in the world. If my land gets upzoned, am I going to pay more property tax? I mean, would be my concern. And again, this is a quote from the chief appraiser at the Travis Central Appraisal District. If it sells, and we know that it's going to be transitioned to a triplex, then it gets removed from the sample set altogether, because then it becomes part of our triplex model data, not our single family model. So they're saying, and again, it's been interesting because I've always said to TNT, you can't rely upon public record data for your zoning fields because it's wrong. I mean, most of the time it's incorrect. Will Travis County do a better job of collecting zoning from Austin? Perhaps, but there are a lot of basin overlay zoning districts to account for. I understand the complexity. But in this case, what they're saying is they're not going to compare. Again, comparisons matter. And as a realtor, if you are comparing properties and not looking at the zoning today, you're doing a disservice to yourself and your clients, because zoning is what gives that property the potential to become a duplex. Like I mentioned, SF3 zoning it's currently the letter of the law. You have SF3 zoning and you've got a 7,000 square foot lot. That is a possible duplex location. There are other considerations, like how do you park on that? Because you do need 2 parking spots per unit. But again, you've got something different than if you compare that to an SF3 with only 4,000 square feet of land. So you want to understand those little differences. So the business impact, again, things I like to talk about. How does this impact the buyers, investors, land use experts? They're going to, I think, with CodeNext, have more work to get their arms around, to figure out how this all plays out. You may even have some real questions asked of you. I'm concerned about traffic and property taxes. I've already addressed the property taxes. Traffic, as I mentioned, there's a tie-in to this with the transportation department, and how they connect is something I'll be watching a little bit more closely as this thing moves forward. But again, permissions will be granted through the transportation department, not just through the planning department. That's my understanding. And then this typical sentiment, this is again from a property owner who just said, look, one side of her street may change from single family to 4-unit lots, right? So we're going to add more density. So she thinks that her property value might be lower, because if you buy a house somewhere else in her location, you're not going to have to deal with the 4-unit property potential next door or across the street. And that's something that you have to wonder about. Again, adding more units can be very beneficial if you're the one who buys the property and can go from 1 to 4. It may not benefit the person next door as much in their minds. Again, that's going to have to be worked through, right? If neighbors get along great, if things get built beautifully, that's great. But at the end of the day, this is people's biggest financial decision they're making, is buying a home. And they don't always get to buy something as gorgeous and as protected as this slide, right? With tons of trees. Sometimes they've got really small yards. And so That's the idea we're going to have to be watching. And I'm just going to touch lightly on this transit corridor because I think that we've gotten questions about this in the past. This is the idea, again, the transportation where you take your roads and then you say this area around this location, I'll go to this slide, anything off the road so many feet is going to be allowed to go more dense than if you get past that line. So we're going to have the densest between these two red lines and then less dense, and it's going to be because we want people to be using public transport. So I'm going to send links because we're running out of time to a city website where you can actually look these things up for a property owner. But again, just want you to be aware of the fact that, so imagine Austin, we talked about that. That was the comprehensive plan people voted yes for. So if it's near a corridor, it gets marked as yes. Is it near transportation network? Yes. This now starts to create the possibility with CodeNext for more development and larger development. I think at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of wrap up. Again, we did some very lightweight, if you will, analysis looking at different things like the SF3. And we started this in October, as you can see right up here. Basically, what you're looking at is a smaller lot size requirement, less parking. That's really what I would say the big takeaway is: smaller lot size requirement, less parking, and again, duplexes on the same lot as a single family home. And again, the notion that the transit corridor is going to allow for more density as they go through the city. And that's really why people are protesting, I think, on this, is because some people argue that shouldn't be considered a corridor. It's this very small road. And so we don't want to be rezoned because of that. So again, you're finding different reasons for different things. I'm going to stop. Oh, I can see some questions have come in. All right.
And Leigh, I mean, we're good on time. If there's more stuff you want to cover, please feel free to, touch on any other slides.
Well, thanks. Let's take a look if we answer some questions. So let me see if we have any that we can.
All right. Yeah. Did you want to grab them from chat, or you want me to read you some?
I'm looking at them. I'm looking at what. Okay, thanks, Nicole. You'll make those available. Great. Okay, too bad the city can't get out of the way of private enterprise. Okay. Property taxes. I know property taxes are a big deal. I mean, again, they're for real. And again, is this a taxation scheme of sorts? Because again, property values, if you will, if you have 4 units instead of 1, shouldn't you be able to tax more? Well, yeah. I mean, you're going to have more to tax. You've got more infrastructure pressure too. One of the things we hear a lot, again, I was on a call for City of Burbank is going through a lot of what they have this thing called jobs versus housing, and the ratio of jobs versus it. And so if you're what they said in City of Burbank, we're job rich, but housing poor, they got to bring more housing in. So now you're competing, right? You've got almost so much plan to do whatever you're doing. Well, now they've got to support all the housing on top of it, as though everyone wants to work right next door. I know, we're all working from home now, but I guess it is kind of interesting. And they do get concerned about property taxes. Question, do the zoning plans do anything to address the gentrification issue? Okay, so yes, so you know where that slide was where I showed the protected area, the east side? That's really where that policy is coming in play. What they're trying to say is, look, we can't let gentrification ruin the possibility of these areas to stay really almost status quo. We need to let those areas stay. And again, that's slide 1. What's your philosophy? Preserve or change? It's like they're trying to balance between the two. And I think for those who are concerned about that affordable demographic, they have it covered, it seems, based on that. Again, that's you can't force people not to sell their property, right? I mean, again, if you've lived somewhere and you've owned a property 25 years, hasn't been that great location all the time, but it was convenient, and now someone wants to take that property and maybe redo it. You can't fault them for wanting to take the money and do something else with that money. So they may not be able to accomplish that real goal, which is to keep a lot of the same people in the same place. That might be a tall order. What source do you recommend to determine zoning for a property? Well, of course I'm going to say Zonabiilty. I love that someone wrote that. It's awesome. Look, we are a good source. And what's great about Zonabiilty is that we're trying to make it something that you can send to your client. We have a share link that goes with our reports that you can then send to your clients and do follow-up. Again, the notion is that zoning is this, it's almost like peeling an onion, where you start to unpeel an onion and start to layers after layer. This is not, even with CodeNext, this is not going to be the silver bullet that just everything becomes so crystal clear and so easy. There are always exceptions. And anyone's call who has not worked on a difficult property, I would love to meet them in person next time I'm in town, because every property has its challenges. Every property is unique. So they try and, you can't have a one size fits all idea, even though that's what they try and do with these regulations. When it comes down to it, you may have the most beautiful property, but the topography is just straight up, right? You're on hill. That's not going to be the same property as, even though the square footage of the lot's the same, it's not going to be the same as something flat and accessible. So every property has its uniqueness. And with Zonabiilty, what we're doing is we're getting you started, but we don't know all the context. We don't know the soils, the topography, and most importantly, we don't know the aspiration. What do you want to try and do with this property? So again, some people buy property to buy and hold. Some buy because they want to change. They want to change that property, and there's a highest and best use maneuver, if you will, a way to make that property really worth more. How do they do it? And that's what zoning, that's why knowing zoning is actually cool. Again, to me, when you get to figure out how this thing works, it's all of a sudden, aha, now you can take some property that was 2 units, and maybe you can put an accessory dwelling unit on it. And that accessory dwelling unit, that's, again, this is kind of part of the pitch of accessory dwelling units. It'll pay for your property taxes. Now, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, right? Again, who knows how much you can rent something for, and again, the level of rate increase on property taxes. But that's kind of one of the concepts. More likely, it could be that your teen or your college age child is going to be moving back home at some point, and you're really happy they have their own space. Or maybe you want to make it into a home office, like crazy cool home office. That's the other possibility. But most of the ADUs that we're seeing across the country are being used to monetize through like an Airbnb concept. And so again, that brings up a whole nother notion of use of the property and neighbors and all those things. Do you know if Houston still has no zoning? Yes, Houston still has no zoning. And important to note, they do things with deed restrictions. So deed restrictions, I talked to someone last week about this. Deed restrictions, obviously title does a great job of bringing those to your attention. Zoning at the city level, they don't get involved with those, which is really interesting. That's something private parties have to sort out and figure out and litigate, if you will, if they need to. They don't get to go to the city and say, I have a private deed restriction and my neighbor's causing problems. They don't get to use that. Now, if it's a zoning issue, that's code enforcement. That's different. But housing, the question follow-up was, housing is much more affordable than Austin. I wonder why. Well, again, there's been a pitch on that. Like, well, it's all about deregulation. If you don't have zoning, you don't have such heavy regulations, the cost will go down. The thing about Houston is they've got an affordable housing task force that I've been looking into. I found that really interesting because, again, as someone who focuses on zoning, it's always sort of like the position is possibly the thing that causes all the problems with affordability. One of the big issues, I think, with affordability, I'm not talking about affordable housing programs, there's a difference. Affordability is what can people afford and what are they willing to pay. And to me, again, if you require that outside the buildings are masonry covered versus wood siding, that's a big expense. I've talked to developers about this. Retention ponds, a lot of environmental things get in the way. They are different zoning ordinances than the zoning. So land use code, like in Austin, they'll have a subdivision ordinance. There's something for environmental, there's something for zoning, but they're all different. The developer or home buyer who wants to change their property has to navigate all those different codes, if you will. So again, that's the big deal on affordability to me, is if you've got to put too many extra features in, that makes it more expensive to build. If it takes you longer to get your permitting, then that's going to be a holding cost, and holding costs cost you money. So can you show a sample report? Let me do that. Let me just stop my share for a second. See if I don't have one open. That's why I'm kind of befuddled here. I wasn't expecting to do that, but you know what I can do is, let's see if I've got sections of one. I did go through this again. I'm just going to do this just because everyone, I think this is probably a good thing, that our disclaimers on the Zonability report, we make these so that you have protection as well as us, right? This is not something to make a final decision on. The idea is that Zonability is going to get you started. There's no straightforward yes or no answers with zoning. I stand by that. And the same thing will be true if CodeNext goes forward. These are big mammoth documents, and then properties are all unique. But again, I understand your position. You're trying to figure out how to get information in the hands of your clients. And one of the cool things about zonability is that we do start with a parcel boundary and then we layer in information. And so zoning is part, again, that property data record, you should not rely upon that. I don't care what county you're using. In Texas, you really need to go to the actual source. If you're going to go directly and do like what I call a DIY, do it yourself, go to the city of Hutto, go to the city of Round Rock or Dripping Springs, look it up. You're going to find there's base zoning, which is what you start with. A city always has base zoning, but then over time they start to add overlay zoning districts. And that is because they want to implement more policy. They want to either encourage something or discourage something. They don't want to rezone the property. Look what's happening with CodeNext. Instead, what they'll do is they'll add more regulations to work and try and develop their policies off of. And so it ends up being like a big cake with lots of layers. Austin, you have this thing called the view corridor. So the Capitol is an important asset. They want everyone to be able to see it. So you can't, all these little lines that come out, they'll show in Zonabiilty as an overlay. You cannot build a certain height and block that view. So that's an overlay. RDS was the other big overlay in Austin because, of course, that was where they didn't want McMansions to get built and oversizing on the lots. Historic preservation, again, overlay. Affordable housing policies. Now, the state of Texas does not require or doesn't mandate affordable housing. So what you have to do as a city like Austin is they have incentive programs, and they do things like developers, if you want to build, we'll give you extra bonuses, or you can pay an in lieu of fee. And that's really the big deal. They'll take that money. I don't know what they do with the money necessarily, but they do charge the developer for not building affordable housing. And I do believe they buy land somewhere else and build something, but I don't know for a fact. With Zonabiilty, again, you don't know that two houses side by side might have different zoning. And this is an actual case right there. So I'm getting to a sample. And again, I'm kind of getting there slowly, but the notion is that our maps take all the different zoning districts. Like there might be 15 different commercial zoning districts and 12 different residential, but we put them under the same color so that you can understand quickly and just carefully know that you've got a difference between these two or across the street. And then what we do, so here's another view of a map. We have a basic section, who owns it, property information. Now this is gathered from the actual assessor and it's updated with the annual tax roll. So again, if you want, this just sold last week, please do not expect us to have it because that's not our strength on that front. We use a certified roll. This is our strength right here, all of this stuff. Here are all these layers of zoning on a property. And what we do is we include the overlays, we include the sub-districts. So neighborhood plans are a big deal in Austin. I mean, again, anyone who lives in the city of Austin is most likely impacted by a neighborhood plan. And they do control different aspects of zoning. Again, this whole notion of what do you do with a substandard lot and what have you, those who have been handled through that neighborhood plan. On the commercial side, if anyone's commercial on this call, I will tell you that neighborhood plans are tricky. The reason is the city never digitized the data. So this goes down to the tract level, these neighborhood plans do, for commercial. And these groups got together and said, look, we don't want a hotel here, we don't want any storage. Well, the only way for you to know that is to actually dig up the neighborhood plan and look that up manually. It's not digitized. We have no way of knowing what they allowed or didn't allow at that tract level. So we can only give you what that commercial zoning is allowing. And then this overlay is going to impact those specifics. And then we do have a thing called Zotential. And again, there's a reason it's not a more sophisticated name. It's because we don't want you to get the wrong idea. It's a ballpark, right? So likely uses, these are coming from the zoning itself. Maybe okay are those that require some kind of permission, but the city has still indicated that they would consider it, right? You might just have to file different petitions, if you will, or applications. And then we do things with sizing, like heights and untapped potential. If it says unknown in your report, it's because it looks like a vacant lot. So we don't have anything there. Let's say this were an 1,000 square foot structure and the size here under the estimated potential is 1720. We would have an untapped potential of 720 right here because it's just the math of what's there now versus what we think might be possible. And again, this is just to help you get started and start to think about location. Speaking of which, I'm going to put this in because I think it's great information. extraterritorial jurisdiction, ETJ as it's called. In Zonabiilty, we have a dotted line for it. This is where cities plan to expand. This is land they plan to annex in the future. It is not currently zoned. That's why you'll say no zoning in your report. This is where they plan to zone, but they don't have it zoned yet. And this is another view of, this is from Kyle, but you can see like how big these areas can be for a city where they plan to expand. There are also places that are nearby, let's say Spicewood is an easy one for me to remember, that just they don't have, it's not incorporated. So they don't have zoning. They're not an incorporated city, so they don't have zoning. So I want to make sure I say that as part of this little Zonabiilty overview. How did I do, Michelle? Is that all right? Okay, so yeah, so we'll follow up with links. I'm looking at this questions, Nicole, and I'll send some links for where agents can go get more information on CodeNext directly from the city. Again, Zonabiilty will include CodeNext once it gets official. At this point, it's just too much of a question mark to be putting in the reports. And I do think that we'll know a lot more in early fall. I just, for some reason, I just think that that's going to start to come back to play after kind of summer recess, so to speak. I'm not saying they're not meeting now, but they are meeting, by the way. Anyone who gets involved in these kinds of, you know, city council meetings, that kind of thing, they're doing it all through this Zoom thing like we're doing today. Isn't that interesting? You have to sign up. You have to, you know about this, Nicole?
Well, yeah, everybody life is running on Zoom these days.
It's like,
We're all
hello.
Zooming.
And the funniest part is if you look at the transcripts from the meetings, the word it's like, it's hilarious because it's like that is what is recorded, so then they don't edit. Anyway,
There was one more question about Houston, and do you know if Houston has no zoning because it seems like their prices are more affordable than Austin?
well, yeah, no, I answered that. And the thing about Houston is it doesn't have zone. That's the one with the deed restrictions, Nicole. They do it all through private deed restrictions. So the neighbor, you know, again, it's neighbor to neighbor concept, right? Where you have to deal. And I also think there might be something to look at with Houston. And I'm not positive about this, but with land area. Again, you know, there's a thing, again, I lived in California for a number of years, and there's a big thing about protection, natural protections, right? I lived in San Francisco. It's 7 square miles. It's got water on 3 sides. I mean, it's like you cannot do more. They filled in the bay where they could. They can't do much more of that kind of thing. So you've got limitations. When I show the ETJ and I show you where they can expand, that's something to think about. You could add supply into those places. I mean, Austin has a big ETJ for that matter, right? It's just a matter of how do they bring utilities in? That's a whole discussion in and of itself. You talk to developers about that kind of thing. But yeah, Houston, I think it might be, again, a combination of factors, but they do have an affordable housing task force. So again, I would love to study that more and find out how is that possible when, again, zoning is always cited as being the reason we don't have affordability, not affordable housing. Affordable housing programs you can start any day you want. Cities across the country have them. Some are more successful than others from what I understand.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions they want to drop into chat real quick or unmute yourself and ask of Leigh? I think this has been so informative.
Is everyone still here? I'm kidding.
Yes.
Still passionate? Okay, good. I mean, it's a big deal. The whole thing is a big deal because you just have different views on how to approach solving problems. I mean, really, at the end of it, you're trying to solve different problems for different people. And again, real estate's so unique, and that's what makes real estate so fabulous. It's such an interesting asset. Oh, thank you. Appreciate all the nice thank yous. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and interest.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Excellent. All right, I will follow up, Nicole. I'll send you some goodies to send out.
Excellent.
Please,
Thank you all for joining us. We did record this call as well, so we'll have a link to it on our YouTube channel, as well as get y'all the slides this afternoon. So thank you for joining us. Leigh, thank you so much. Just tremendous information.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. Thanks again, everyone. Bye now.
All right, y'all take care. We'll see you soon.
I like that beach, Joe.